The phone buzzed insistently against the marble countertop as Victoria Matthews stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Two pink lines. After 5 years of fertility treatments and countless disappointments, the impossible had happened. At 43, she was finally going to be a mother. The mahogany-paneled kitchen of their Greenwich estate felt suddenly cold despite the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 20 years of marriage, and this would be the most important phone call she'd ever made to her millionaire ex-husband-to-be, though she didn't know that part yet. Richard Matthews Enterprises, this is Jennifer speaking. The secretary's voice came through crisp and professional. Hi, Jennifer. It's Victoria. Is Richard available? I have wonderful news to share. Victoria's voice bubbled with excitement as she pressed the phone closer to her ear. The pause stretched too long. In the background, Victoria could hear the familiar sounds of the office. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the hum of success that had built their fortune. Oh, Mrs. Matthews, he's in a meeting. Can I take a message? Victoria's smile faltered. After 20 years of marriage, she knew every inflection in her husband's secretary's voice. Jennifer always put her calls through immediately. Something was wrong. What kind of meeting? I really need to speak with him. It's important. Another pause. It's a personnel matter. Very sensitive. He asked not to be disturbed. Personnel matter. Victoria's stomach clenched. Richard had been working late more often lately, taking weekend calls, scheduling mysterious business trips. She'd attributed it to the stress of expanding the company, but now doubt crept in like a cold draft. Can you at least tell him I ask him to come home early today? I'm making his favorite dinner. Victoria tried to keep her voice light, but something had shifted in the air between them. Of course, Mrs. Matthews, I'll give him the message. The line went dead, leaving Victoria alone in the cavernous kitchen with her pregnancy test and growing unease. She should have been floating on cloud nine, planning nurseries and calling her sister Emma with the news. Instead, she found herself wondering why her husband's secretary sounded like she was walking on eggshells. Victoria placed the test carefully on the granite island and walked to the window overlooking their manicured gardens. The estate had been Richard's dream when they'd bought it 15 years ago, a symbol of how far he'd climbed from his middle-class roots. Now it felt more like a beautiful prison. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Richard's direct line, the one that bypassed Jennifer entirely. Her finger hovered over the call button. This news deserved to be shared in person, face to face, with champagne and tears of joy, but the nagging feeling in her chest wouldn't go away. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 10 times. Richard usually returned Jennifer's messages within minutes. By 10:30, Victoria's excitement had curdled into worry. By 11, worry had transformed into something closer to dread. She tried his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Richard Matthews. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. Richard, it's me. Please call when you get this. I have something important to tell you. Something wonderful. She paused, wondering if she should just blurt it out, but decided against it. I love you. Call me. Victoria spent the next hour pacing between the kitchen and the living room, checking her phone every few minutes. She tidied surfaces that were already spotless, rearranged flowers that were perfectly arranged, and tried to convince herself that her husband was simply buried in meetings, but deep down, in the place where wives store their uncomfortable truths, Victoria Matthews knew her perfect life was about to shatter. She just didn't know how completely. At noon, she heard the front door slam with unusual force. Richard's heavy footsteps echoed across the Italian marble floors, moving faster than his usual measured pace. Victoria smoothed her blouse and touched her still flat stomach, whispering a small prayer to the tiny life growing inside her. Victoria, we need to talk. His tone made her stomach drop like a stone. She emerged from the dining room where she'd been setting candles for a romantic lunch, the pregnancy test hidden behind her back like a secret weapon she wasn't ready to deploy. Darling, I have something wonderful too. Not now. Oh, Richard loosened his silk tie with sharp, agitated movements, avoiding her eyes for the first time in their marriage. Pour yourself a drink. Make it a strong one. The irony wasn't lost on her. She couldn't drink. She was carrying his child. Victoria studied her husband's face, the strong jaw that had first attracted her, the silver temples that made him look distinguished rather than old, the brown eyes that had once looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. Now those eyes looked anywhere but at her. Richard, what's wrong? You're scaring me. He walked to their bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, though he rarely drank before evening. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. Sit down, Victoria. I'd rather stand. He drained half the bourbon in one swallow. No, you need to sit down. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Victoria's legs felt suddenly weak. She lowered herself onto the edge of their leather sofa, still clutching the pregnancy test behind her back. 20 years of marriage had taught her to read her husband's moods, his tells, his way of processing stress. This wasn't business pressure or family drama. This was something else entirely, something that made her beautiful, successful, intelligent husband look like a guilty schoolboy. There's someone else, he said finally, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. Victoria's world tilted on its axis. The grandfather clock ticked. The ice maker in their sub-zero refrigerator cycled on. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked. Normal sounds in a moment that would divide her life into before and after. What do you mean, someone else? Richard paced before their stone fireplace like a caged animal, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. Victoria remained perched on the sofa's edge, still processing his words. Someone else. In 20 years of marriage, she'd never imagined those words coming from her husband's mouth. Her name is Amber. She's 26. She works in marketing. 26. Half Victoria's age. The number burned in her chest like acid. She thought of all the young women in Richard's office, the fresh-faced college graduates with their trendy clothes and unlimited energy. She'd met them at company parties, smiled at them, never seeing them as threats. How long? Victoria's voice came out steady despite her racing heart. 8 months. 8 months. While she'd been planning their anniversary trip to Tuscany, while she'd been enduring hormone injections and fertility treatments, desperately trying to give him the child he'd always said he wanted, while she'd been the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the woman who made his success possible. Victoria's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Richard, I'm pregnant. He spun around so fast he nearly dropped his glass. Bourbon sloshed over the rim, staining his white shirt cuff. What did you say? I'm pregnant. With your baby. She pulled the test from behind her back, holding it up like evidence in a trial. The fertility treatments worked. We're finally going to have the family we always talked about. His face went white, then red, then something close to gray. He set down his glass with unsteady hands and sank into the armchair across from her. For a moment, Victoria allowed herself to hope. Maybe this would change everything. Maybe their baby would make him remember what they'd built together. That's impossible. The doctors said, apparently miracles happen. She held up the test, the 2 pink lines still vivid against the white plastic. Even to women married to millionaire ex-husbands who cheat with girls younger than their sports cars. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. Richard's Ferrari was 28 years old, a classic he'd restored himself. His mistress was 2 years younger than his car. Victoria, you don't understand. Then explain it to me. She stood up, energy surging through her despite the emotional whiplash. Explain how my husband of 20 years has been sleeping with someone else for 8 months. Explain how you can sit there and tell me about your midlife crisis while I'm holding a positive pregnancy test. Richard buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes, genuine regret mixed with something that looked like panic. I never meant for this to happen. It started innocently, She was assigned to my account. We worked late nights together. She reminded me of you when we first met. When we first met, I was 23 and you were 35. Is that what this is about? You want to relive your glory days? That's not fair. Fair. Victoria's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You want to talk about fair? I've spent 20 years building your career, hosting your clients, managing your household, being your perfect accessory. I put my own dreams on hold so you could chase yours. And now, when I'm finally pregnant with the child we've wanted for years, you tell me you're having an affair with someone young enough to be our daughter. She's not that young. She's 26. Richard, when she was born, we were already dating. When she was learning to walk, we were getting married. When she was in elementary school, I was having my first miscarriage. The mention of their lost pregnancies hung heavy in the air. They'd never talked about those early losses, the hope and heartbreak cycle that had defined their 30s. Victoria had carried that pain alone while Richard threw himself into building his empire. I know this is complicated. Complicated? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Our marriage isn't complicated. Richard, it's over. The only question is whether you're going to choose your pregnant wife or your child bride. Don't call her that. What should I call her? Your girlfriend, your mistress, the marketing executive you're planning to leave me for? Richard stood up, straightening his shoulders in the way he did when preparing for difficult business negotiations. But this wasn't a merger or acquisition. This was their life, their marriage, their unborn child's future. I need time to think. Time to think. Victoria clutched the pregnancy test tighter. About what? About whether you want to be a father to this baby? About whether 20 years of marriage means anything to you? About whether you love me at all? Of course I love you, but you love her more. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything he couldn't say and everything she finally understood. Victoria felt something inside her chest crack. Not her heart exactly, but something deeper. The foundation of trust that had supported their entire relationship. What's her last name? Victoria asked quietly. Why? Because I want to know the name of the woman who's destroying my marriage. I think I have that right. Chen. Amber Chen. Victoria nodded, filing the name away. And she knows about me. Another pause. She knows we're having problems. That's not what I asked. Does she know you're married? Does she know about this house? About our anniversary next month? About the fact that we share a bed every night? It's complicated. Stop saying that. Victoria's composure finally cracked. Nothing about this is complicated. You're either married or you're not. You're either faithful or you're not. You're either going to be a father to this baby or you're not. Richard walked to the window, looking out at the gardens they'd planted together, the life they'd built together. When he turned back, his face had the cold, distant expression he wore in difficult board meetings. I want a divorce. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She'd known they were coming, had heard them in his tone and seen them in his eyes, but the reality still stole her breath. While I'm pregnant, we can work out the details. You'll be well provided for. The baby, too. How generous of you. Victoria stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. Tell me something, Richard. When you were planning this conversation, did you think I'd just gracefully step aside? Did you think I'd make this easy for you? I hoped you'd understand. Understand what? That after 20 years of marriage, you've decided you'd rather be with someone who could be our daughter, that you want to abandon your pregnant wife for a woman barely out of college. She's not barely out of college. She has her MBA. From where? Northwestern. Victoria almost laughed. I have my MBA from Harvard. I also have 20 years of experience building this company with you. But I guess that doesn't matter when you're thinking with your ego instead of your brain. She walked toward the stairs, needing distance from his guilty face and weak justifications. At the bottom step, she turned back. You know what the saddest part is? Richard, I was so happy this morning. For the first time in years, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. We were finally going to have the family we dreamed about. Victoria, don't, just don't. She held up her hand to stop him. I need to think about what's best for this baby. And right now, that doesn't include a father who thinks love is something you trade in for a newer model. Victoria climbed the stairs to their bedroom, each step heavier than the last. Behind her, she heard Richard pour another drink. Above her, the nursery she'd begun planning in her mind seemed to shimmer and disappear. The pregnancy test was still clutched in her hand, the two pink lines as clear as ever, but everything else in her world had changed in the space of 30 minutes. Her husband was in love with someone else. Her marriage was ending, and she was going to raise their miracle baby alone. The transformation from wife to single mother had begun, though Victoria didn't yet realize that this ending would become the beginning of the best chapter of her life. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the mahogany dining table as the Matthews family gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner 6 days later. Victoria had spent the week in a haze of disbelief, moving through their house like a ghost while Richard slept in the guest room and left early for work each morning. She'd told no one about the pregnancy or the affair, not her sister Emma, not her closest friends, not even her mother. The secret felt too huge and too fragile to share, like a soap bubble that would burst if she breathed on it wrong. Richard insisted they keep up appearances for his parents. Margaret and Charles Matthews Sr. sat stiffly at opposite ends of the table, their marriage a 40-year exercise in polite coexistence. Victoria's sister Emma had driven down from Boston with her teenage twins, Jake and Sophie, who picked at their food while scrolling through their phones. "So, Richard, how's business?" his father asked, cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision. Charles Sr. had built the original Matthews company from nothing, and he expected detailed reports on his son's stewardship. Victoria watched her husband squirm in his chair. Did his parents know about Amber? Had anyone else noticed the tension crackling between their hosts? "Business is strong. Dad, we're expanding into 3 new markets this quarter." "Good, good. And Victoria, how are your charity committees still organizing those fundraisers for the Children's Hospital?" Victoria's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Actually, I've been thinking about stepping back from some of my commitments, focusing on other priorities." Emma looked up from her wine glass, studying her sister's face with the keen attention only siblings possess. "Other priorities like what?" "Actually," Richard cleared his throat, "Victoria and I have an announcement." The table went silent except for the soft clink of crystal glasses and china plates. Even Jake and Sophie looked up from their phones, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Emma's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. "Oh my God, are you finally pregnant?" Victoria's breath caught. Her sister had always been perceptive, but this timing was brutal. Margaret Matthews dropped her fork with a sharp clatter against her plate. "Well," Richard said, his voice carefully controlled, "we're getting divorced." The explosion of voices that followed made Victoria's head spin. Sophie gasped audibly. Jake muttered something that sounded like "holy shit" under his breath. Emma's wine glass hit the table hard enough to splash burgundy across the white tablecloth. Margaret Matthews stood so quickly her chair toppled backward with a crash. Divorced after 20 years. What on earth happened? "Mother, please, don't mother me." "Richard, 20 years of marriage and now you want to throw it all away? What about your reputation? What about the business?" Charles Sr.'s face had turned the color of rare beef. "This is absurd. Matthews men don't get divorced. We work through our problems." Emma found her voice first. "Wait, what about didn't you just ask if she was pregnant?" Victoria looked around the table at the faces of Richard's family, people she'd considered her own family for 2 decades. Margaret with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and disapproving frown. Charles with his stern businessman stare. Emma with her concerned brown eyes. The twins looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Victoria's pregnant," Richard continued, dropping the second bombshell like he was reading quarterly earnings. "But we're still getting divorced." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went through several color changes before settling on a shade of white that matched the tablecloth. Emma's mouth fell open. Charles Sr. reached for his bourbon with shaking hands. Pregnant. Margaret's voice came out as a whisper. At your age, how irresponsible. Something snapped inside Victoria. She'd spent 20 years being the perfect daughter-in-law, biting her tongue through Margaret's passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled criticisms. Not anymore. The mess, Margaret, isn't my pregnancy. The mess is your son sleeping with his 26-year-old employee while his wife was taking fertility drugs to give him the child he claimed to want. The words fell into the dining room like grenades. Emma's wine glass shattered as it hit the floor. Sophie made a sound like a wounded animal. Even Jake looked up from his phone with genuine shock. Margaret gripped the edge of the table. 26, Richard. Tell me this isn't true. Mother, it's complicated. Complicated. Charles Sr.'s voice boomed across the room. You're having an affair with someone younger than your nephew, Jake, who was 24 and working his first job out of college, looked mortified. Dude, that's seriously messed up. Language, Jake, Emma said automatically, but her attention was fixed on Victoria. Honey, are you okay? When did this happen? Last Monday, same day I found out about the baby. Victoria's voice came out steadier than she felt. Your brother-in-law decided to confess his 8-month affair right after I took a pregnancy test. 8 months. Margaret sank back into her chair. 8 months and we didn't know. None of us knew, Victoria said, except maybe Jennifer. His secretary has been covering for him. Emma stood up and walked around the table to put her arms around Victoria. Why didn't you call me? You've been dealing with this alone all week. I didn't know what to say. How do you tell people that your perfect marriage is actually a lie? Richard finally found his voice. It's not a lie. What Victoria and I had was real. This situation is just unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. Victoria pulled away from Emma's embrace and faced her husband directly. You call destroying our marriage and abandoning your pregnant wife unfortunate timing. I'm not abandoning anyone. We can work out custody arrangements. Custody arrangements? Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. You're talking about custody of a child that isn't even born yet. A child whose mother you're divorcing for some girl barely out of diapers. She's not barely out of diapers. Mother, she's a successful marketing executive with an MBA. From where? Charles Sr. demanded. Northwestern. Northwestern. Margaret looked like she might faint. You're leaving your Harvard-educated wife for someone from Northwestern. Victoria almost smiled despite everything. Trust Margaret to turn infidelity into academic snobbery. Emma sat back down heavily. I can't process this. Victoria, you're going to be a single mother at 43. Apparently. And Richard, you're going to be a divorced father dating someone half your age. She's not half my age. She's closer to half than she is to your age, Sophie pointed out with the brutal honesty of a 17-year-old. That's like mathematical fact. Jake nodded. Yeah, Uncle Rich. This is pretty gross. Like, my girlfriend is older than your girlfriend. Richard's face flushed red. This isn't about age. It's about compatibility, about finding someone who understands me. Someone who understands you. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. I understood you when you were nobody. I understood you when you were working 80-hour weeks to build this company. I understood you through every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt. But apparently understanding isn't enough when there's a prettier, younger option available. Margaret was fanning herself with her napkin. I need my pills. Charles, get my pills. What pills? Emma asked with concern. My heart medication. This stress is too much. Victoria looked around the table at the wreckage of what had been a normal family dinner 15 minutes ago. Crystal glass sparkled on the floor. Wine stained the white tablecloth like blood. Margaret clutched her chest dramatically while Charles Sr. poured himself another bourbon. The twins stared at their phones like they were lifelines to sanity. and Richard sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who'd finally realized the true cost of his choices. "I think," Victoria said quietly, "dinner is over." She stood up slowly, smoothing her dress over her still flat stomach. The baby flutter she'd felt earlier seemed stronger now, as if her unborn child was responding to the emotional chaos. "Victoria, wait," Emma called as she headed for the door. "I'm tired, Em. We can talk tomorrow." "Where are you going?" Richard asked. Victoria paused at the threshold of the dining room, looking back at the scene of destruction. "Home, or what's left of it." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she could hear the family behind her dissolving into arguments and recriminations. Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. "How could you do this to us, to her, to yourself?" Victoria closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Her marriage wasn't just ending privately, it was ending publicly, messily, with witnesses and collateral damage. But for the first time in a week, she didn't feel alone. Emma would stand by her. Even Richard's own family was appalled by his behavior. And somewhere in the voices downstairs, she heard something that surprised her. They were defending her, not him. The Women Supporting Women network she didn't even know she needed was already forming around her. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Victoria's mood as she drove her Mercedes through Manhattan traffic toward Richard's office building. She'd never visited his workplace unannounced in 20 years of marriage. It had seemed unnecessary, intrusive, a violation of the professional boundaries that kept their relationship balanced. But nothing about their relationship was balanced anymore. The 42nd floor of the glass tower overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of a city that suddenly felt foreign to Victoria. Richard's office occupied the corner, a testament to his success and power. Jennifer's desk sat like a fortress outside his door, perfectly organized and strategically positioned to control access to the man who'd become Victoria's millionaire ex-husband in everything but legal documentation. "Mrs. Matthews." Jennifer looked up from her computer screen, her usually perfect composure cracking like ice on a warm day. "I wasn't expecting you." Jennifer Kim had worked for Richard for 3 years, a 20-something graduate from Columbia with impeccable credentials and even more impeccable discretion. She was pretty in an understated way. Sleek black hair, designer glasses, clothes that whispered expensive rather than shouting it. Victoria had always appreciated her professionalism and efficiency. Today, Jennifer looked nervous. "How long have you known, Jennifer?" The secretary's carefully composed expression shattered completely. "Known what? About Amber?" Jennifer's hand stilled on her keyboard. Her eyes darted toward Richard's closed office door, then back to Victoria's face. The guilt was written there as clearly as words on a page. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but what your loyalty is to your paycheck." "No!" Jennifer's voice came out sharper than intended, drawing looks from other employees in the open workspace beyond. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "It's not like that. This situation is more complicated than you know." Victoria moved closer to the desk, her voice equally quiet but infinitely more dangerous. "Then uncomplicate it for me." Jennifer glanced around the office, then gestured toward a small conference room. "Can we talk privately?" They settled into leather chairs around a polished table that probably cost more than most people's cars. Jennifer's hands shook as she closed the door and activated the privacy glass. "Amber is my roommate," she said without preamble. Victoria felt the world tilt again, the same sensation she'd experienced a week ago when Richard first said someone else. "Your roommate? We share an apartment in Tribeca. We've been friends since college." Jennifer's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them in too long. She didn't know he was married at first. When she found out, she was devastated. But then he told her you two were separated, getting divorced anyway. He said you'd been living separate lives for years. Victoria's laugh came out bitter and sharp. "Separate lives, we share a bed every night. Shared, anyway. We had dinner with his parents yesterday. Does that sound separated to you?" That's what I told her. But she's young, and she's never been involved with a married man before. She wanted to believe him because Jennifer stopped herself. Because what? Because she loves him. The words hung in the climate-controlled air like a toxic cloud. Victoria absorbed the information, adding it to the growing list of betrayals that defined her new reality. Show me, Victoria said quietly. Show you what? The evidence, the photos, the texts, whatever proof you have that my husband has been living a double life. Jennifer pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Mrs. Matthews, maybe you shouldn't. I need to see it. All of it. The first photo made Victoria's stomach lurch. Richard and Amber at Del Posto, the Italian restaurant where he'd proposed to Victoria 21 years ago. They were sharing tiramisu, his hand covering hers across the white tablecloth. Amber was laughing at something he'd said, her face bright with the kind of joy Victoria remembered from her own early days with Richard. When was this taken? 2 months ago. It was their 6-month anniversary. 6-month anniversary. While Victoria was planning their actual anniversary trip to Tuscany, Richard was celebrating a different milestone with someone else. Jennifer swiped to the next photo. Richard and Amber at their cabin in the Hamptons, the weekend retreat Victoria had helped design and decorate. Amber wore a flowing white dress that caught the sunset light, looking like a bride in a romantic movie. Richard's arm was around her waist, his expression tender and protective. He took her to our cabin, multiple times. She thinks it's his bachelor pad. More photos followed in a devastating slideshow. Richard and Amber at charity galas where Victoria should have been by his side. At Broadway shows Victoria had wanted to see. At restaurants they discovered together in the early years of their marriage. Each image was a small theft, a piece of their shared life repackaged for someone new. He gave her your grandmother's necklace, Jennifer whispered, showing her a photo from what looked like a corporate Christmas party. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The sapphire necklace had been her something blue at their wedding, passed down through 4 generations of women in her family. She'd worn it on every anniversary, every important business dinner, every moment when she wanted to feel connected to the women who'd come before her. Now it sparkled against Amber Chen's throat like stolen starlight. Where is she now? Victoria's voice came out steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside her chest. Upstairs. Richard moved her to the executive floor last month, gave her a promotion and a salary increase to justify her new office. Victoria stood slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach where the baby fluttered as if sensing her mother's distress. At 4 months pregnant, she was just beginning to show. Soon everyone would know about the pregnancy, would see the full scope of Richard's narcissistic abuse. What floor? 45. But Mrs. Matthews, maybe you should think about this. Confronting her won't change anything. Won't it? Victoria moved toward the door. I've spent a week wondering what kind of woman breaks up a 20-year marriage. Now I'm going to find out. Jennifer stood up quickly. She's not a monster. Mrs. Matthews, she's been lied to just like you have. Maybe more because she's young enough to believe that love conquers all. Victoria paused with her hand on the door handle. Is that what you think this is love? I think it's what she thinks it is. And I think Richard enjoys having someone look at him the way she does. Like he's perfect. Like he can do no wrong. Like he's not a 55-year-old man having a midlife crisis. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt endless. Victoria studied her reflection in the polished steel doors. 43 years old, impeccably dressed, successful in her own right, carrying the child she'd wanted for 20 years. On paper, she was everything a woman was supposed to be. In reality, she was about to confront the person who'd made her feel like she wasn't enough. The 45th floor smelled of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Executive row, where the real decisions were made and the real power was wielded. Victoria had been up here exactly twice in Richard's career. Once for a company anniversary party, once to meet with his insurance agent about their life policies. Now she was here to meet the woman who'd replaced her in her husband's heart. Amber Chen's office was at the end of the hall. behind glass walls that offered no privacy but maximum prestige. Victoria could see her before she knocked. Petite, elegant, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was everything Victoria had expected and nothing she'd prepared for. The woman destroying her marriage looked like someone she might have been friends with in another life. Victoria knocked on the glass door and watched Amber look up from her computer with curious brown eyes. Even from a distance, she was beautiful in the effortless way of women who'd never worried about aging. Never counted gray hairs or laugh lines. Never felt the panic of time slipping away. "Come in," Amber called, standing up with a welcoming smile that faltered when she recognized her visitor. Victoria stepped into the office and closed the door behind her, noting the fresh orchids on the desk, the expensive art on the walls, the view of Central Park that rivaled Richard's own office. The company was apparently investing heavily in their newest marketing executive. "You must be Victoria," Amber said, her voice carefully neutral. No apology, no shame, no acknowledgement that she'd just been caught in the crosshairs of someone else's life. "You must be the woman destroying my marriage," Victoria replied, matching her tone. Amber's composure didn't crack. If anything, she seemed to straighten, as if drawing on some inner reserve of confidence. "Destroying your marriage was over before I met Richard. He told me all about it." What exactly did he tell you? That you two haven't been intimate in years? That you married him for his money and stayed for the lifestyle? That you've been trying to get pregnant to trap him into staying married? Each lie hit Victoria like a physical blow. She placed her hands protectively over her barely visible bump, feeling the baby respond to her emotional state with increased movement. "And you believed him? Why wouldn't I? Richard's successful, sophisticated, generous. He's nothing like the boys I usually date." "Boys" being the operative word, Victoria said quietly. "Tell me something. Amber, how old are you exactly?" 26. "I was 23 when I met Richard. He was 35, just starting his company, working out of a one-room office in Queens. I believed him when he said he'd love me forever too." For the first time, something flickered across Amber's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first tiny crack in her confidence. "That's different. You were both young then. Were we? He was 12 years older than me, just like he's 29 years older than you. The age gap hasn't changed. Only the woman has." Amber sat back down behind her desk, perhaps unconsciously seeking the protection of furniture and position. "Richard loves me. Richard loves conquests. I should know. I used to be one." The words hung in the air between them. Two women separated by nearly 2 decades but connected by the same man's lies. The same man's need to feel powerful and desired and young. Victoria looked around the office again, at the expensive furnishings, the prestigious location, the unmistakable signs of favoritism that went far beyond professional merit. This wasn't just an affair. This was a complete reconstruction of Richard's life with a younger, more malleable leading lady. "He's going to leave his pregnant wife for you," Victoria said. "Are you proud of that?" Amber's composure finally cracked. "I didn't know you were pregnant when this started, but you know now, and you're still here, still wearing my grandmother's jewelry, still playing house in my marriage." Amber's hand moved instinctively to the sapphire necklace at her throat. "He said it was his grandmother's. It was mine. 4 generations of strong women wore that necklace, and now it's around the neck of someone who thinks love means breaking up families." Victoria turned to leave, but paused at the door. "When you're 43 and pregnant, and Richard trades you in for a newer model, will age still be just a number?" She didn't wait for an answer. The elevator doors closed on Amber's stricken face, and Victoria descended back to the lobby with a strange sense of completion. She'd looked her replacement in the eye and seen not a villain, but a victim, someone almost as trapped by Richard's lies as she'd been. The real enemy wasn't the young woman upstairs. It was the man who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish 2 different women while being faithful to neither. That evening, Richard found Victoria in their bedroom, carefully folding clothes into open suitcases spread across their king-size bed. The sight stopped him in the doorway like he'd walked into an invisible wall. "What are you doing?" He stood frozen, still wearing his expensive suit from a day that had apparently included damage control calls from Jennifer about his wife's unscheduled office visit. "What does it look like I'm packing?" Victoria held up a maternity dress she'd bought that afternoon, the first public acknowledgement that her body was changing, that she was really going to be a mother. The soft blue fabric seemed to glow in the evening light streaming through their bedroom windows. "Victoria, be reasonable. We can work this out." She turned to face him, noting how he loosened his tie but kept his jacket on, as if he might need to make a quick escape. "Work what out? Richard, your mistress thinks we've been separated for months. Your secretary has been covering for you. Your parents think I trapped you with this pregnancy. What exactly are we working out? The baby changes everything. Does it?" Victoria folded another maternity top, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Because Amber seems to think you're getting divorced anyway. She was quite confident about that when I met her today." Richard's face went pale. "You went to see her. I wanted to look the woman destroying my marriage in the eye, understand what she had that I don't." Victoria placed the shirt carefully in the suitcase. "Turns out what she has is youth and gullibility. She actually believes your lies about our marriage being over." "They weren't lies, really, because I was under the impression we were trying to have a baby together. I was under the impression we were planning our 20th anniversary trip to Tuscany. I was under the impression we shared a bed every night and a life every day. Was I wrong about all of that?" Richard sat heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. The silver at his temples that had always made him look distinguished now just made him look tired. "I never meant for it to happen this way." "How did you mean for it to happen?" Victoria's voice carried 20 years of suppressed frustration. "Were you going to divorce me before or after I gave birth to your child? Before or after our anniversary? Before or after you finished stealing all the meaningful moments from our marriage to give to someone else?" I was confused. "Let me help you get unconfused." Victoria closed the suitcase with a sharp snap. "Here's your choice, me and your baby, or Amber and your midlife crisis. But you don't get both." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Victoria pulled another suitcase from their walk-in closet, the sound of wheels on hardwood echoing through the room. "I've spent 20 years making things complicated for your benefit, navigating your moods, supporting your ambitions, sacrificing my own goals so you could achieve yours. I'm done being complicated." Richard watched her pack with growing panic. "Where will you go?" "Emma's, initially. Then I'll figure out something more permanent." Victoria folded a silk blouse, thinking of all the business dinners and charity events where she'd worn it while playing the perfect CEO's wife. "The baby and I will be fine." "You can't just take my child." "I'm not taking your child. I'm taking my child. The child I've wanted for 20 years while you were building your empire. The child I'm carrying while you're planning your new life with someone else." Victoria opened her jewelry box and began sorting through pieces that told the story of their marriage. The pearl earrings from their first anniversary, the tennis bracelet from her 30th birthday, the wedding ring that now felt like evidence of fraud. She left the wedding ring on the nightstand but packed everything else. "Victoria, please, don't do this. Do what? Refuse to be humiliated anymore. Refuse to share my husband with someone half my age. Refuse to pretend this marriage has any meaning left." Richard stood up and began pacing, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floors. "We can go to counseling, work through this. Plenty of couples survive infidelity. Survive it, maybe. But do they thrive? Do they trust again? Do they look at their spouse and see the person who loved them, or the person who betrayed them?" Victoria held up a framed photo from their wedding day, young, hopeful, convinced they were different from all the other couples who'd fail. She'd been so naive, so certain that love was enough. "I can't look at you anymore without seeing her," she continued. "I can't touch you without wondering if you've been with her. I can't listen to you say you love me when I know you've been saying the same words to someone else." "That's different." "How is it different?" Victoria's composure finally cracked. Because she's younger, because she doesn't know your flaws yet, because she still thinks you're perfect, because she doesn't look at me like I'm a disappointment. The words exploded out of him, raw and unfiltered. Victoria stepped back as if she'd been slapped. I disappoint you. Her voice came out deadly quiet. Richard ran his hands through his silver hair, realizing he'd said too much. That's not what I meant. No, I think that's exactly what you meant. Your wife of 20 years disappoints you. The woman who built this life with you, who supported every dream, who stood by you through every failure. She disappoints you. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The pressure. Victoria's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. What pressure? Richard. The pressure of being successful, of having more money than we can spend, of living in a beautiful home with a woman who loves you. The pressure of being 55 and feeling like my life is half over. The pressure of looking in the mirror and seeing my father. The pressure of knowing that everything I've built will end with me because we don't have children. We're having a child now. Now, when I'm too old to enjoy it, when I'm going to be 70 at high school graduation, when I'm going to be the old dad at soccer games. Victoria stared at him, finally understanding the depth of his narcissistic abuse. Not just against her, but against himself. So this is about your ego, about feeling young and virile and attractive. It's about feeling alive again. And I make you feel dead. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything he couldn't deny and everything she finally understood. Victoria felt something inside her chest settle into place. Not peace exactly, but clarity. You know what, Richard? You're right. You are too old to be a father to this baby. Not because of your age, but because of your maturity level. A real man doesn't abandon his pregnant wife for someone young enough to be his daughter. She zipped the second suitcase and pulled it off the bed. I'm going to raise this child to be better than you, to understand that love isn't something you trade in when it gets complicated, to value character over convenience. Victoria, wait. No. She picked up her purse and car keys from the dresser. I've waited 20 years for you to become the man I thought I married. I'm done waiting. At the bedroom door, she turned back one last time. Richard sat on their bed surrounded by the remnants of their shared life. Photo albums, jewelry boxes, the detritus of 2 decades together. When you're planning your wedding to Amber, she said quietly, remember that she's going to be 43 someday too. And when that happens, there will be another 26-year-old ready to make her feel like a disappointment. Victoria walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs for the last time as Richard Matthews' wife. Behind her. She could hear him calling her name, but she didn't turn around. The transformation from martyr to free woman had begun, though Victoria wouldn't understand the true gift of Richard's betrayal until much later. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened. The Mercedes started smoothly, carrying her away from the house where she'd been a wife toward an uncertain future, where she'd be a mother. In her rearview mirror, the estate grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Her old life was ending. Her real life was about to begin. 3 days later, Victoria sat in her sister's sunny kitchen in Boston, nursing her second cup of decaf coffee and trying to make sense of the legal documents spread across Emma's breakfast table. Divorce papers, custody agreements, financial disclosure forms. The paperwork of dismantling a 20-year marriage looked surprisingly mundane. You need to document everything, Emma said, sliding another folder across the table. Every affair detail, every financial irregularity, every lie he told. Massachusetts is a no-fault state, but when there's this much money involved, evidence of misconduct matters. Emma's law degree from Boston University had been gathering dust since she'd chosen to be a stay-at-home mom 15 years ago, but her legal mind was sharp as ever. She'd spent the last 3 days researching divorce law and calling in favors from former classmates who specialized in high-asset cases. I have photos, Victoria said, thinking of Jennifer's devastating slideshow. Dates, locations, credit card receipts probably. But Emma, I don't want to destroy him. I just want to be free. Honey, he's the one who chose destruction when he started sleeping with his employee. You're just protecting yourself and your baby. Victoria's phone buzzed against the wooden table. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen, and Victoria felt her stomach clench. Any communication from Richard's office could only mean complications. Mrs. Matthews, I hope it's okay that I'm calling your personal number. Of course, Jennifer. What's wrong? I need to see you. There are things you should know before the divorce proceedings start. Things about Amber, about Richard's finances, about how long this has really been going on. Victoria looked at Emma, who was already reaching for her car keys. Can you come to Boston? I'm staying with my sister. I'll drive up tonight after work. Text me the address. 2 hours later, Jennifer sat in Emma's living room, clutching a coffee mug and looking like someone who'd been carrying secrets too heavy for her shoulders. She'd changed out of her professional office attire into jeans and a sweater, looking younger and more vulnerable than Victoria had ever seen her. I quit yesterday, Jennifer said without preamble. I couldn't work for him anymore after what happened Monday. After seeing what he put you through. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. What I'm about to tell you would have been impossible if I was still his employee. Jennifer pulled out her laptop and set it on Emma's coffee table. I've been Richard's secretary for 3 years. In that time, I've seen him cycle through 4 different affairs. Victoria's coffee mug slipped in her hands. 4. Amber isn't the first. She's just the first one who lasted long enough to become a problem. Jennifer opened her laptop and pulled up a series of files. I documented everything because, honestly, I was afraid he'd try to blame me if any of it came out. The screen filled with a spreadsheet more detailed than most corporate budgets. Names, dates, duration of affairs, gifts purchased, trips taken, Victoria's 20-year marriage reduced to data points and transaction records. Sarah from accounting, 18 months. Melissa from the PR firm, 6 months. Tanya from the law office, 8 months. Jennifer's voice was clinical, professional, as if she was reading quarterly earnings instead of listing her boss's conquests. And now Amber, going on 9 months? Emma leaned forward, her lawyer instincts engaged. 9 months, I thought you said 8. It started 9 months ago. Richard lied about the timeline to make it seem less calculated. Jennifer clicked to another screen. But this is the important part. Look at the financial patterns. A new spreadsheet appeared. This one tracking money movement that made Victoria's head spin. Richard had been moving assets for over a year, transferring funds to offshore accounts, liquidating investments, restructuring the business to minimize his apparent worth. He's been planning this divorce for at least 18 months, Jennifer explained. Long before you got pregnant, long before Amber, he's been systematically hiding money and preparing for the financial fallout. Victoria felt nauseous, and not from morning sickness. How much? Approximately $12 million that I could trace. There's probably more. Emma whistled low. That's serious financial fraud. Victoria, this changes everything. Wait, there's more. Jennifer clicked to another file. Richard has been promising Amber things he can't deliver. He told her he'd buy her a house in the Hamptons, set her up with her own marketing firm, pay for her to get an advanced degree at Wharton. With what money? Victoria asked. Exactly. He's been using company funds to maintain his lifestyle with her, the dinners, the trips, the jewelry. Some of those charges go back to before you were even separated. It's embezzlement. Victoria stared at the screen, watching her marriage dissolve into spreadsheet cells and bank transaction records. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been systematically preparing to abandon her while stealing their shared assets to fund his new life. There's something else, Jennifer continued, her voice getting quieter. About Amber. What about her? She's pregnant too. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Emma reached over and grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. How far along? Victoria's voice came out as a whisper. 3 months. She told Richard last week, right after you confronted her in the office. Victoria calculated quickly. If Amber was 3 months pregnant, That meant conception had happened around the time Victoria was starting her latest round of fertility treatments. While she was pumping her body full of hormones and hope, Richard was creating a baby with someone else. Does she know about my pregnancy? She found out Monday when Richard told her about your office visit. She's been calling him constantly, crying, asking him to choose between you. And what did he tell her? Jennifer's expression grew even more troubled. He told her he'd file for divorce immediately and marry her before either baby is born. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart this time, but something deeper. The last vestige of respect she'd held for the man she'd loved for 20 years. So we're both pregnant by the same man, who's promising both of us a future while secretly stealing money to fund his escape plan. Victoria's voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm for the magnitude of what she was processing. That's about the size of it, Jennifer confirmed. Emma stood up and began pacing, her legal mind working through implications. Victoria, this is criminal fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, probably RICO violations if he used the business to hide assets. You could have him arrested. I don't want him arrested. I want him gone. Then you use this information to negotiate the divorce settlement of the century, Emma said firmly. He's committed multiple felonies. The threat of prosecution will make him very cooperative. Victoria looked at the evidence spread across her sister's coffee table. Bank records, photographs, detailed transaction logs, email printouts. The complete destruction of everything she'd believed about her marriage, laid out in neat columns and rows. Jennifer, why are you doing this? Why are you helping me instead of protecting your employer? Jennifer closed her laptop and met Victoria's eyes directly. Because I watched him lie to you for 3 years. Because I covered for him when you called looking for him and he was with other women. Because I've been complicit in narcissistic abuse and I can't live with that anymore. What will you do now? I'm starting my own virtual assistant business, helping women who are starting over, building new lives. Emma gave me the contact information for some of the women in your divorce support group. Victoria looked between Jennifer and Emma, seeing the beginning of something that would become much larger, a network of women supporting women through major life transitions. The idea had been percolating in her mind since the family dinner disaster, but now it was taking concrete shape. What if we did this together? Victoria said slowly. What if we started a consulting firm specifically for women over 40 who are rebuilding their lives, divorce support, career transitions, financial independence coaching? Emma stopped pacing. You're talking about starting a business while you're pregnant and going through a divorce. I'm talking about turning my worst experience into something that helps other women avoid the same mistakes. Richard spent 20 years making me financially dependent on him. I'm never going to be in that position again. Jennifer smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I know at least 50 women who would be your first clients. Victoria looked around Emma's living room, at the legal documents, the evidence of Richard's betrayal, the laptop full of proof that her marriage had been a lie. Then she looked at the 2 women who dropped everything to help her rebuild. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you introduces you to the people who will help you become who you're meant to be. The Women Supporting Women Network wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming a reality, built on the ashes of a marriage that had needed to end for everyone to find their true selves. 2 weeks later, Victoria found herself sitting across from Amber Chen in a small cafe near Columbia University, a neutral location chosen carefully to avoid any connection to Richard's world. The meeting hadn't been Victoria's idea. Amber had called Jennifer, who'd called Victoria, setting up a chain of communication that felt like espionage. Amber looked different away from her corporate office. Smaller, somehow, and definitely pregnant. The slight swell of her belly was visible beneath her casual sweater, a mirror of Victoria's own changing body. 2 women, both carrying the same man's children, meeting like diplomats from warring nations. Thank you for coming, Amber said quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. I wasn't sure I would either. Victoria stirred her decaf coffee, studying the young woman across from her. Without the armor of professional dress and office confidence, Amber looked her age, young, uncertain, and increasingly aware that the fairy tale she'd been living had some very dark plot twists. I need to know the truth, Amber continued, about your marriage, about Richard, about everything he told me. What did he tell you about this meeting? He doesn't know about it. I haven't told him about. Amber gestured vaguely toward her stomach. About the pregnancy yet. Victoria's eyebrows rose. He doesn't know you're pregnant. I found out the day after you came to my office. I was going to tell him that night, but then he came home talking about divorce lawyers and custody arrangements and how complicated everything had become with your pregnancy. Amber's voice got smaller. I realized he wasn't ready for more complications. Home, Victoria caught the word. You live together. He moved into my apartment 6 months ago, said he couldn't stand living in the house with you anymore, that it felt like a mausoleum of a dead marriage. Victoria absorbed this information, adding it to the growing list of Richard's lies. He'd been sleeping in their guest room for less than 2 weeks, which meant he'd been maintaining 2 homes, 2 lives, 2 completely different versions of himself. Amber, I need you to understand something. Richard and I were not separated. We were not living separate lives. We shared a bed every night until 2 weeks ago. We were actively trying to have a baby together. We had dinner with his parents every Sunday. Amber's face went pale. But he said, he lied, about everything. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Amber photos, recent pictures from their anniversary dinner, from holiday parties, from the Hamptons house that Amber thought was Richard's bachelor pad. This is what a dead marriage looks like, apparently. Amber stared at the photos, her hands shaking slightly. The house in the Hamptons. He said he bought it after you separated. We bought it together 12 years ago. I decorated every room. I planted the garden you've been enjoying. Oh, God. Amber put her head in her hands. I've been such an idiot. Victoria felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. You're not an idiot. You're young and you trusted someone who's very good at lying. I'm 26 years old and I'm having an affair with a married man whose wife is also pregnant. That's the definition of idiot. No, that's the definition of being manipulated by a narcissist. Amber looked up sharply. Narcissist. Haven't you noticed the way he needs constant admiration? The way he rewrites history to make himself the victim? The way he promises you things that require other people to sacrifice? Amber was quiet for a long moment, stirring her tea with mechanical precision. He promised to leave you before I got involved. Said it was just a matter of timing. Finding the right moment. There's never a right moment to abandon your pregnant wife. Just like there's never a right moment to promise a future you can't deliver. What do you mean? Victoria pulled out copies of the financial documents Jennifer had provided. Richard has been hiding assets for over a year. The money he's been spending on you, the dinners, the trips, the jewelry, it's embezzled from his own company. The house he promised to buy you doesn't exist. The marketing firm he said he'd fund. There's no money for it. Amber read through the documents, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to horror. He's been stealing from his own business. Yeah, which means from both of us. Ultimately, both of us. I'm half owner of Matthews Enterprises. Every dollar he's stolen from the company is a dollar stolen from my assets too. Victoria leaned back in her chair. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Amber was quiet for several minutes, processing information that was clearly reshaping her understanding of the last 9 months. I thought I was in love with a successful businessman who was trapped in a loveless marriage. Turns out I'm the other woman for a thief who's been lying to everyone. That's a pretty accurate summary. Victoria, I need you to know, if I had understood what was really happening, I never would have gotten involved. I'm not someone who destroys marriages, but you are someone who destroys marriages. Amber, we all are. When we make choices based on what we want to believe instead of what we know to be true. Amber flinched at the blunt assessment. That's harsh. It's honest. You saw the wedding ring on his finger. You met his secretary who obviously knew about me. You went to his house and saw evidence of a woman's presence everywhere, but you chose to believe his explanations because they made you feel better about what you were doing. You're right. Amber's voice was barely above a whisper. I chose to believe him because I wanted the fairy tale to be real. I did the same thing for 20 years, believed his explanations for working late, for secretive phone calls, for business trips that didn't quite add up. We both wanted to believe in a version of Richard that doesn't actually exist. Victoria studied Amber's face, seeing herself at 26, eager to be loved, willing to overlook red flags, convinced that her love could transform an imperfect man into her perfect partner. What happens now? Amber asked. Now you decide who you want to be. The woman who continues an affair with a married father-to-be, or the woman who walks away from a situation that was built on lies. And you, what will you do? Victoria placed her hands protectively over her growing belly. I'm going to raise my child to understand that integrity matters more than convenience, that you can't build happiness on someone else's pain, that love without honesty isn't love at all. Amber nodded slowly. I need to tell him about the pregnancy. Yes, you do. But Amber, don't expect him to be happy about it. Richard likes the idea of children more than the reality. And he definitely doesn't want two babies with two different women complicating his carefully constructed lies. What do you think he'll do? Victoria considered the question, thinking about the man she'd been married to for 20 years. His patterns, his priorities, his fundamental selfishness. I think he'll pressure you to make a choice he's not brave enough to make himself. And I think you deserve better than that. They sat in silence for several minutes. Two women bound together by the same man's betrayal, each carrying his child, each facing an uncertain future shaped by his choices. Victoria. Amber's voice was small. Do you hate me? Victoria looked at the young woman across from her, pregnant, scared, beginning to understand the true cost of the choices she'd made. The hate she'd expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, she felt something closer to sadness for all of them. Herself, Amber, even Richard, who destroyed everything good in his life, chasing an illusion of youth. I hate what you did, Victoria said carefully. But I don't hate you. You're going to be the mother of my child's half-sibling. We're connected now, whether we like it or not. Amber's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. For all of it. I know you are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? As Victoria walked back to her car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. The meeting with Amber had crystallized her understanding of Richard's narcissistic abuse patterns and her own role in enabling them. She'd spent 20 years making excuses for his behavior, explaining away his selfishness, accepting less than she deserved because she'd been afraid of being alone. Now she was going to be alone, at least in terms of marriage. But she wasn't going to be lonely. She had Emma, Jennifer, the growing network of women who were supporting each other through major life transitions. She had her unborn child and the prospect of motherhood she dreamed about for years. Most importantly, she had herself, the woman she'd been before Richard, the woman she'd forgotten during 20 years of making herself smaller to accommodate his ego. The woman she was rediscovering now that she was free to grow again. The midlife transformation wasn't just about leaving a bad marriage. It was about reclaiming the life she'd set aside for someone else's dreams. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, jolting Victoria awake in Emma's guest bedroom. Richard's name appeared on her phone screen, and she almost declined the call. Nothing good ever came from pre-dawn conversations with her millionaire ex-husband. Victoria, we need to talk. There's been a development. His voice sounded strained, almost panicked. Victoria sat up in bed, her hand automatically moving to her growing belly. At 5 months pregnant, the baby's movements were becoming more pronounced, especially when she was stressed. What kind of development? Amber's pregnant? Victoria closed her eyes. Even though she'd known this was coming, Jennifer's intelligence had prepared her for this moment, but hearing it from Richard still felt like a punch to the gut. How far along? 3 months. She just told me last night. Victoria did the math again. confirming what she already knew. Richard had gotten both of them pregnant within weeks of each other, while lying to both about his intentions and his circumstances. "Congratulations," she said flatly. "I'm sure you're thrilled to be having two babies with two different women. Victoria, please, this complicates everything. Complicates Richard. You've been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a marriage for the better part of a year. What exactly does complicated mean to you?" There was a pause, and Victoria could hear traffic in the background. He was calling from his car, probably on his way to another damage control meeting with his lawyers. "I need you to be reasonable about the divorce settlement. Reasonable, like you were reasonable when you were stealing $12 million to fund your affair." Another pause, longer this time. "How do you know about that?" "I know about everything, Richard. The hidden assets, the embezzlement, the other affairs before Amber. I know about your promises to buy her a house with money you don't have. I know about the engagement ring you bought with company funds." "Engagement ring?" Victoria's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You're engaged to her. It's not official. You bought her an engagement ring while you're still married to your pregnant wife. The divorce will be final soon. The divorce hasn't even been filed yet." Victoria got out of bed and began pacing Emma's guest room, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Through the window, she could see her sister in the kitchen making coffee, preparing for another day of supporting her sister through the worst period of her life. "Richard, let me make something very clear to you. I have documented evidence of multiple felonies: wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, probably racketeering. I have photos, bank records, email communications, witness testimony. I could have you arrested today if I wanted to." "You wouldn't do that." "Try me." The silence stretched between them, filled with 20 years of marriage dissolving into legal threats and criminal accusations. Victoria thought of the young couple who'd stood at an altar 2 decades ago, promising to love and honor each other through good times and bad. They'd had no idea how bad the bad times could get. "What do you want?" Richard asked finally. "I want you to stop lying. To me, to Amber, to yourself. I want you to face the consequences of your choices instead of trying to manipulate everyone else into making those consequences disappear." "That's not practical." "Then here's something practical. Full custody of our child. 70% of all marital assets, including the hidden ones. Alimony for 10 years. Complete financial transparency going forward. And you pay for all legal fees." 70% Victoria. That's ridiculous. 40% would have been reasonable if you'd been honest about wanting a divorce. 70% is the price of fraud and embezzlement. 80% is the price if I have to involve federal prosecutors. Victoria ended the call and sank into Emma's guest room chair, adrenaline coursing through her system. The baby responded to her elevated heart rate with increased activity, as if sensing that major changes were coming. Her phone buzzed immediately. A text from Richard. "We need to meet in person. Today." Victoria typed back, "My lawyer's office. 2 p.m. Bring your attorney and your accountant." The response came quickly. "Just us. Please." "No. Those days are over." 2 hours later, Victoria sat in her attorney's conference room with Emma beside her and Jennifer across the table. Having officially joined their emerging consulting firm as chief operating officer, Patricia Kellerman, Victoria's divorce attorney, was a 60-year-old woman with silver hair and a reputation for extracting maximum settlements from cheating husbands. Richard arrived with his legal team, 2 attorneys, an accountant, and a financial advisor. He looked older than Victoria had ever seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and the slightly rumpled appearance of a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "Before we begin," Patricia said, "my client wants it understood that she has evidence of multiple criminal activities. We're prepared to negotiate a settlement that avoids federal prosecution, but only if we reach terms that adequately compensate Mrs. Matthews for the financial and emotional damages she suffered." Richard's lead attorney, Harold Weinstein, shifted uncomfortably. What kind of evidence? Jennifer opened her laptop and began projecting financial records onto the conference room's large screen. Bank transfers, credit card statements, investment transactions, a paper trail that mapped Richard's systematic theft of marital assets. $12.3 million moved to offshore accounts over the past 18 months, Patricia continued. Company funds used for personal expenses related to extramarital affairs, false financial disclosures to banks and tax authorities, wire fraud across state lines. Harold whispered something to Richard, who nodded grimly. What are you asking for? Harold said. 70% of all assets, including hidden accounts. Full custody with supervised visitation rights. 10 years of alimony. Mr. Matthews pays all legal and investigative costs. Complete financial transparency going forward. That's outrageous. That's generous, Patricia interrupted. The alternative is federal prosecution and civil asset forfeiture. Your client would lose everything and spend the next decade in federal prison. Victoria watched Richard's face as the reality sank in. The man who'd spent 20 years building an empire had destroyed it in 18 months of selfish choices. The successful businessman had become a white-collar criminal. The husband and father-to-be had become a defendant. I need to speak with my client privately, Harold said. While the attorneys huddled in the hallway, Victoria studied Richard across the conference table. He looked defeated, diminished, like a man who'd finally run out of lies and manipulations. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. The marriage, the love, the life we built together. Richard met her eyes for the first time in weeks. It was real for me. Maybe not healthy, maybe not honest, but real. Then why did you destroy it? Because I was scared. Scared of getting old. Scared of dying without having really lived. Scared of looking back with regrets. So instead, you created different regrets. Bigger ones. Yeah. Richard's voice was barely audible. I'm sorry, Victoria. For all of it? Victoria placed her hands on her belly, feeling their child move in response to her emotional state. I'm not the one you need to apologize to. This baby is going to grow up knowing their father chose his midlife crisis over his family. Amber's baby is going to grow up knowing their father was married to someone else when they were conceived. Those are the apologies you need to make. The attorneys returned, and Harold's expression told the story before he spoke. We accept the terms with two modifications. 65% of assets instead of 70, and visitation rights without supervision after the first year, assuming no further legal issues. Patricia looked at Victoria, who nodded slowly. Agreed, but Mr. Matthews signs a morality clause. Any further criminal activity, any violation of the custody agreement, any attempt to hide assets, and he forfeits all parental rights. Done, Harold said quickly, before Richard could object. Victoria stood up, her hand still resting on her growing belly. There's one more thing. I want the house. Which house? Harold asked. All of them. The Greenwich estate, the Hamptons house, the apartment in the city. I helped build this empire, and I'm keeping the real estate? Richard's face flushed red. Victoria, that's everything. That's what you should have thought about before you decided to become a criminal. Patricia began drafting final terms while the financial experts calculated exact asset divisions. Victoria watched her marriage dissolve into legal language and dollar amounts. 20 years reduced to contractual obligations and court orders. Victoria, Richard said as they prepared to leave, what will you tell our child about me? The truth, that you were capable of great love and terrible choices, that you built something beautiful and then destroyed it because you were afraid of growing old, that you're human and flawed, and their father, and Amber. Victoria considered the question. That's between you and her, but Richard. She deserves better than lies and promises you can't keep. Both of your children deserve better. As Victoria left the law office, she felt the weight of 20 years lifting from her shoulders. The woman who'd entered that conference room was still legally married to Richard Matthews. The woman who left was free to become whoever she wanted to be. 6 months later, Autumn leaves crunched under Victoria's heels as she walked through Central Park. Her daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Matthews, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Motherhood at 44 wasn't easy, but it was transformative in ways Victoria had never expected. Every sleepless night, every diaper change, every tiny smile reminded her what unconditional love really felt like. Not the conditional approval she'd received from Richard, but the pure, uncomplicated connection between mother and child. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Board meeting at 3. Sarah Chen wants to discuss the new office space. Victoria smiled at the name. Amber had legally changed her last name after Richard's latest disaster. Apparently, being engaged to two different women simultaneously while married to a third had finally opened her eyes to his character flaws. She'd left him when she was 6 months pregnant, taking her MBA and her hard-earned wisdom to start fresh. The consulting firm that had begun as an idea in Emma's living room now occupied 2 floors of a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn. Phoenix Rising Life Transition, consulting for women over 40, had grown from 3 founding partners to 15 employees in less than a year. Victoria's specialty was financial independence coaching, helping women understand their assets, identify hidden accounts, negotiate fair divorce settlements. Emma handled the legal consultations, reviewing contracts and connecting clients with appropriate attorneys. Jennifer managed operations and client relationships with the efficiency she'd honed during her years enabling Richard's lies. And Amber, now Sarah Chen, having reclaimed her mother's maiden name, ran their marketing and business development with the passion of someone who'd learned firsthand how devastating financial dependence could be. Mrs. Matthews. A voice interrupted Victoria's thoughts as she entered their office building. A woman in her late 40s stood near the reception desk, clutching a manila envelope and looking lost. "I'm Victoria. How can I help you?" "My name is Linda Morrison. I heard about your firm through a friend. I think my husband is having an affair, and I don't know what to do." Victoria recognized the expression on Linda's face, the same confusion and devastation she'd felt that morning 6 months ago when she'd called Richard's office with news of her pregnancy. The same desperate hope that somehow this was all a misunderstanding. "Let's talk in my office," Victoria said gently. "Sarah can watch the baby." 30 minutes later, Linda Morrison's story spilled out in familiar patterns. A successful businessman husband, mysterious late nights, credit card charges that didn't make sense, a secretary who seemed nervous when Linda called. The details were different, but the underlying narcissistic abuse was identical. "I feel so stupid," Linda said, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. "I should have seen this coming." "You're not stupid. You're human. We want to trust the people we love, even when the evidence suggests we shouldn't." "What did you do when you found out about your husband?" Victoria thought about the question, remembering the woman she'd been 6 months ago, financially dependent, emotionally devastated, convinced her life was ending because her marriage was over. "I gathered evidence. I documented everything. I built a support network. And most importantly, I stopped making excuses for his behavior." "But how did you find the strength to leave?" Victoria looked through her office window at Sarah Elizabeth, who was being entertained by the other women in the office, successful professionals who'd all faced their own versions of starting over. "I realized that staying in a marriage built on lies wasn't protecting anyone, especially not the child I was carrying. I wanted to raise a daughter who understood her worth, who wouldn't accept less than she deserved, who would never be afraid to walk away from someone who didn't value her." Linda nodded, taking notes. "Do you think all men cheat?" "No, but I think many people, men and women, make selfish choices when they're afraid of aging, or bored, or feeling like they missed out on something. The question isn't whether your husband will face those feelings. It's how he'll handle them when he does. And if he handles them badly, then you handle them well. You protect yourself and your assets. You build a life that doesn't depend on someone else's choices. You become the kind of woman your children will be proud to emulate." After Linda left with a detailed action plan and contact information for attorneys, Victoria found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who'd been devastated by Richard's betrayal had become someone who helped other women navigate similar crises. Her phone rang, and Emma's number appeared on the screen. "How was the client meeting?" Emma asked. "Textbook case. Cheating husband. Hidden assets. Woman who suspects but doesn't want to believe it. We'll help her get the evidence she needs and negotiate a settlement that protects her future." "Good. Listen, I just got off the phone with that reporter from Forbes. They want to do a feature story about Phoenix Rising, how women over 40 are building businesses and reclaiming their power after major life transitions." Victoria looked around their office, at the motivational quotes on the walls, the success stories pinned to bulletin boards, the photographs of clients who'd graduated from victims to victors. What angle are they taking? The midlife transformation trend. How divorce and career changes and empty nest syndrome are becoming catalysts for women to pursue dreams they'd put on hold. They want to interview all four founding partners. Victoria paused, including Amber. Especially Amber, a 27-year-old woman who's helping women twice her age rebuild their lives. That's exactly the kind of story that gets attention. After Emma hung up, Victoria walked over to Sarah Chen's office. The young woman was bent over her laptop, working on a presentation for their newest corporate client, a financial planning firm that wanted to offer divorce transition services to their female clients. "Sarah, do you have a minute?" Amber looked up, and Victoria was struck by how much she'd changed in 6 months. The naive young woman who'd believed Richard's lies had been replaced by someone harder, wiser, more realistic about human nature. Motherhood and betrayal had aged her in good ways. "What's up?" "Emma says Forbes wants to interview us. All of us, including you. Are you comfortable with that level of publicity?" Sarah considered the question. "Will they mention Richard?" "Probably. The story doesn't make sense without the background." "Good. I want other young women to hear about what happened to me. I want them to understand that when a married man says his marriage is over, they should ask to see the divorce papers." Victoria smiled. "You've come a long way from the woman who thought love conquered all. I've learned that love without honesty isn't love. It's manipulation." "That's very wise. I had a good teacher," Sarah said, looking directly at Victoria. "You could have destroyed me when you found out about the affair. Instead, you helped me understand that I was a victim too. That changed everything for me." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "We were both victims of the same man's lies. The only difference was experience. Experience and strength. You showed me what it looked like to refuse to be a victim, to take control of your own story." As Victoria walked back to her office, she reflected on the unexpected gift that had emerged from Richard's betrayal. She'd gained more than financial independence and a successful business. She'd gained purpose, community, and the satisfaction of helping other women avoid the mistakes she'd made. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Matthews? My name is Patricia Williams. I got your number from Linda Morrison. I think I need your help." Victoria looked at baby Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, blissfully unaware that her mother had become someone who helped other mothers protect their futures. This little girl would grow up seeing women supporting women, watching her mother build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. She typed back, "I'd be happy to help. Can you come in tomorrow at 10? The response came immediately, "Thank you." "I didn't know who else to call." Victoria smiled, remembering how alone she'd felt 6 months ago, how impossible the future had seemed. Now she was part of something larger, a network of women who'd learned that their worst moments could become their greatest opportunities for growth. The Women Supporting Women movement wasn't just a business model, it was a revolution. One client at a time, one success story at a time, one woman learning her worth at a time. 1 year later, Victoria stood at the podium in the main conference room of Phoenix Rising's expanded offices, looking out at an audience of 200 women who'd gathered for their first annual Midlife Transformation Summit. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating faces that told stories of resilience, growth, and hard-won wisdom. "A year ago," Victoria began, "I thought my life was ending. My millionaire ex-husband had chosen someone half my age. I was pregnant at 43, and everything I'd believed about my marriage turned out to be a lie. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. These women knew variations of this story: the cheating spouse, the financial manipulation, the narcissistic abuse disguised as love. Today, I'm going to tell you why that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Victoria clicked to her first slide, a photo of herself from 18 months ago, perfectly coiffed and dressed, standing beside Richard at a charity gala. She looked beautiful, successful, and completely hollow. This woman had everything according to conventional standards: a wealthy husband, a beautiful home, social status, security. She also had no idea who she was when she wasn't being someone's wife. The next slide showed Victoria 6 months later, holding baby Sarah Elizabeth in the hospital, exhausted but radiant with genuine joy. This woman had lost her marriage, her financial security, and her carefully planned future. She also discovered something she'd forgotten: her own strength. Victoria walked away from the podium, moving closer to her audience. How many of you have heard that divorce after 40 is devastating, that starting over in midlife is impossible, that women our age should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection we can get? Hands shot up around the room, followed by knowing laughter. I used to believe those lies too. I stayed in a marriage that had been over for years because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of financial insecurity, afraid that no one would want a woman my age. Victoria paused, making eye contact with familiar faces in the audience: former clients who'd become friends, women who'd rebuilt their lives from the ground up. But here's what I learned: there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. There's a difference between financial dependence and financial security, and there's a massive difference between being wanted and being valued. She clicked to another slide, a photo of the Phoenix Rising team at their recent corporate retreat: Victoria, Emma, Jennifer, and Sarah Chen, surrounded by their 15 employees, all women who transform personal setbacks into professional purposes. 18 months ago, I was financially dependent on a man who was systematically stealing from our shared assets to fund his affairs. Today, I run a multi-million-dollar consulting firm that helps women achieve true financial independence. Applause erupted from the audience, but Victoria held up her hand. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because if someone had told me 2 years ago that my husband's betrayal would lead to the most fulfilling chapter of my life, I would have thought they were insane. Victoria moved to the center of the room, speaking without notes now, drawing on emotions that were still raw enough to be authentic. The night Richard told me about his affair, I was holding a positive pregnancy test. I thought I had everything I'd ever wanted: a baby, a successful husband, a secure future. But what I actually had was an illusion built on someone else's lies. She gestured toward the back of the room, where Sarah Elizabeth played quietly in a corner with 2 other toddlers, children of Phoenix Rising employees who'd built a company culture that supported working mothers. My daughter will never know what it feels like to depend on someone else for her sense of worth. She'll never stay in a relationship because she's afraid of being alone. She'll never make herself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego. Victoria's voice grew stronger, more passionate, because she's growing up watching her mother and her chosen aunts build something meaningful together. She's seeing women supporting women, not competing for male approval. The audience was completely silent now, leaning forward in their chairs. Last month, Richard's second wife, yes, he married Amber 6 months after our divorce was final, filed for divorce herself. Apparently, he'd started another affair with someone at their country club. The pattern repeats because the man never changes. Victoria clicked to her final slide, a group photo from Sarah Elizabeth's first birthday party. Victoria was surrounded by the Phoenix Rising team, clients who'd become friends, Emma's teenagers, and a dozen other children who called her Aunt Victoria. This is my family now. Not the family I planned, but the family I chose and built. Every woman in this photo has faced a major life transition: divorce, career change, empty nest syndrome, financial crisis, health challenges. Every single one of them thought they were starting over. But you know what we discovered? Victoria paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected her own journey. We weren't starting over. We were starting fresh. We were finally becoming who we were meant to be when we stopped trying to be who someone else needed us to be. The applause was thunderous now, but Victoria wasn't finished. I want to leave you with 3 pieces of hard-won wisdom. First, your worst day might be the first day of your best life. Second, financial independence isn't about having enough money to never work again. It's about having enough resources to never stay somewhere you're not valued. And third, women supporting women isn't just a nice idea, it's a survival strategy. Victoria walked back to the podium as the audience rose to their feet. Phoenix Rising has helped over 300 women navigate major life transitions in the past year. We've recovered $47 million in hidden assets. We've negotiated settlements that allowed women to start businesses, go back to school, buy homes, and build futures they control. She looked directly at Sarah Chen, who was wiping tears from her eyes in the front row. But our greatest success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in transformation. In women who thought they were too old, too scared, too damaged to start again. In mothers who wanted to show their children what strength looks like. In women who decided they'd rather be alone than undervalued. Victoria's voice dropped to nearly a whisper, but the room was so quiet everyone could hear her. A year ago, I thought my husband's betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to me. Today, I'm grateful for it, because his lies forced me to find my truth. His abandonment forced me to find my strength. His betrayal led me to women who became my chosen family. She gestured toward baby Sarah Elizabeth, who'd fallen asleep in her carrier. My daughter will grow up knowing that love isn't something you earn by making yourself smaller. That security isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you build for yourself. That the best relationships are partnerships between whole people, not desperate arrangements between broken ones. Victoria closed her notebook and looked out at the sea of faces, women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who'd gathered to learn how to reclaim their lives. The story I told myself for 20 years was that I needed Richard to be complete. The story I'm telling now is that I was always complete. I just forgot for a while. Your story isn't over because a chapter ended badly. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when you stop trying to save what's already gone and start building what could be. As the audience erupted in applause again, Victoria felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with purpose. Richard's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. It had forced her to discover who she really was when she wasn't being who someone else needed her to be. Later that evening, as Victoria tucked Sarah Elizabeth into her crib in their cozy townhouse, she reflected on how different this life was from the one she'd planned. The Greenwich estate had been sold to fund the business. The country club memberships had been canceled. The charity board positions had been passed to other wealthy wives, but this life was fully hers in a way the old one never was. Every success belonged to her. Every relationship was built on honesty rather than convenience. Every day was lived authentically rather than performed perfectly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Amazing presentation today. I'm proud of who you've become." Victoria typed back, "I'm proud of who we've all become." Because that was the real transformation, not just individual healing, but collective strength. The Women Supporting Women Network had become more than a business strategy. It had become a movement, a recognition that the strongest families aren't always related by blood, and the most powerful love stories aren't always romantic. As Victoria turned off the lights in her daughter's nursery, Sarah Elizabeth stirred and made the soft sounds of a baby settling into deep sleep. This little girl would grow up in a world where her mother had turned her greatest betrayal into her greatest triumph, where women helped other women rise instead of competing for scraps. The fairy tale Victoria had believed in for 20 years, that love meant sacrifice and compromise and making yourself smaller, had ended with Richard's confession in their marble foyer. But the real story, the one about a woman who discovered her own power when she stopped giving it away to someone else, was just beginning. Outside her window, the city hummed with possibility. Inside her home, love lived without conditions or lies or the fear of abandonment. Victoria Matthews had lost her marriage, her security, and her illusions. In return, she'd gained her integrity, her independence, and her true self. It was the best trade she'd ever made.